A cleaning lady won the lottery and tricked her husband to avoid sharing the $1 million prize. On the day she signs the divorce, she discovers that the prize. Emily woke up every day at 5 in the morning. The routine was always the same. Prepare coffee for Matthew, her husband, put on her worn-out cleaning uniform, and leave before dawn to catch the crowded bus to work. At 37 years old, life seemed like an endless cycle of sacrifices and frustrations. Matthew, a mechanic by profession, was a calm man, almost resigned to the simplicity of his existence. He believed that small pleasures, like watching football on Sundays and taking care of the old car in the garage, were enough to be happy. But for Emily, that wasn't enough. On that particular day, a Friday, Emily was especially tired. The heat seemed to make every task heavier, and the constant sound of the vacuum cleaner made her head throb. At the end of her shift, while gathering the last cleaning tools, she felt her pants pocket. There was the lottery ticket she had bought earlier in the week. She had used the change from a purchase Matthew had asked her to make at the corner store. Nonsense, she had thought at the time, but she still carefully wrote down the numbers, choosing dates that held personal significance. Back home, dinner was silent as usual. Matthew, tired from work, watched the news while chewing his rice and beans. Emily, however, was restless. There was something in the air, an insistent curiosity that led her to grab her phone and check the winning numbers for that day. While Matthew snored on the sofa, Emily sat down at the kitchen table and took the ticket out of her pocket. She entered the drawn numbers with trembling fingers and compared them one by one. The first number matched, then the second, the third, until all 6 numbers aligned perfectly. She won. The paper slipped from her hands, and her heart felt like it wanted to leap out of her chest. Emily covered her mouth to stifle a scream, the shock flooding every part of her body. She quickly got up, making sure Matthew was still asleep, and went to the bedroom. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she stared at the ticket as if it were a pass to another life. For a moment, she thought about waking Matthew up to share the news. But she soon dismissed the idea. Emily knew what that would mean, splitting the prize, making decisions together, losing her freedom. Deep down, she knew that her relationship with him no longer had passion or a future. He was just another part of a life she wanted to leave behind. Still panting, Emily began to think about everything she could do with that money. Trips, new clothes, a house of her own. However, she needed to be careful. She couldn't just disappear with the fortune without raising suspicions. She needed a plan. After hiding the ticket inside an old cookie tin on the highest shelf of the wardrobe, Emily returned to the living room with a calm expression. Matthew was still sleeping, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken her life. She looked at him with a mix of contempt and pity. "I'm not going to share this with you," she murmured to herself, before turning off the light and going upstairs to the bedroom. Lying in bed, her thoughts were racing. Emily knew her life was about to change completely. But to do so, she would need to be cunning and calculated. Fate had given her a unique chance, and she wasn't willing to waste it. That night, as Matthew snored, she began to sketch the first outlines of what would become the most ambitious plan of her life. Emily woke up the next day with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Every detail needed to be meticulously calculated for her plan to work. She knew that to get rid of Matthew without splitting the money, she would have to make him the culprit. It wasn't enough to simply ask for a divorce. She needed him to come out as the villain. And the centerpiece of this plan would be Sophia, the neighbor from apartment 203. Sophia was young, beautiful, and single, and she had the habit of spending afternoons on her apartment balcony, watering plants and listening to music. The mere fact of her presence annoyed many of the women in the building, making her the perfect target for Emily to manipulate. Emily began her campaign carefully. At the market, she let slip an apparently innocent remark to Mrs. Elizabeth, the biggest gossip in the condominium. Have you noticed how Matthew has been disappearing lately? He arrives so late. I don't know. Sometimes I think he spends more time in 203 than at home. But it might just be in my head, right? Mrs. Elizabeth's eyes widened. She didn't need to say anything. The gleam in her eye showed that the information would spread like wildfire. Emily knew exactly what she was doing. In the following days, she upped the ante. During a casual conversation in the building's laundry room, she mentioned the same suspicion to another neighbor, Mrs. Karen. It's funny, isn't it? Sophia seems so lonely, but these days I've seen Matthew leaving the building with her. Of course, it could just be friendship. I trust him, but you know how people talk. The effect was immediate. Gossip began to circulate throughout the building, and Sophia started to notice the curious looks and whispers whenever she walked through the hallways. Without understanding why, she began to avoid the common areas, which only reinforced suspicions that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Emily continued to play her role as a devoted and hurt wife. At the beauty salon, she let slip that Matthew had been distant lately, as if something was bothering him. In the hallways, she displayed a forced smile and a lost look, as if trying to hide deep pain. The neighbors began to comment among themselves, sympathizing with the supposed betrayal Emily was facing. Matthew, oblivious to everything, continued his normal routine. He left early for the workshop, returned home exhausted, and never noticed the suspicious glances from the neighbors or the silences loaded with meaning. To him, life went on quietly, without any noticeable changes. But Sophia began to suspect something. One day, while watering her plants, she noticed Mrs. Elizabeth staring fixedly at her from the window of the neighboring building. When Sophia waved, Mrs. Elizabeth quickly turned her face away, as if she had been caught in the act. The strange behavior of the people around her was starting to bother her. Emily, observing everything from afar, felt in control. Every comment, every furtive glance, and every whisper were steps toward her ultimate goal. The atmosphere in the building was changing, and Matthew, without knowing, was being transformed into the unfaithful man of the story she had created. One afternoon, Sophia had the courage to confront the situation. She stopped Mrs. Elizabeth in the hallway and asked directly, "Is there something you want to tell me? Because I've been noticing some strange looks around here." Mrs. Elizabeth, caught by surprise, tried to deflect, but ended up saying, "Look, Sophia, you'd better talk to Emily. She's very hurt. I think you know what it's about." Sophia was confused but decided not to insist. Instead, she began to watch more closely. Emily was scheming something, and she felt it wasn't going to be anything good. While the building was abuzz with rumors, Emily felt that everything was going according to plan. She knew that the most important piece of her plan was almost in place. Now it was just a matter of time for Matthew to become completely isolated and vulnerable, ready for the next move. And so, Emily's game continued, manipulating the people around her with an almost Machiavellian precision. But Sophia, without knowing, was about to become an unexpected obstacle. Emily chose the perfect moment to execute the next stage of her plan. It was a Sunday night when Matthew was most relaxed, sitting on the sofa with a beer in his hand and his eyes fixed on the television. He didn't even notice when Emily entered the room, but the tone of her voice made him divert his attention from the game. "We need to talk," she said, crossing her arms. Matthew looked at her with curiosity, not suspecting the weight those words carried. "What's up? Did something happen?" Emily took a deep breath, adjusting her expression to appear vulnerable but hurt. She knew that the performance was crucial. "I know about you and Sophia." Matthew frowned, clearly confused. "What? What's this about?" "Don't play dumb, Matthew. Everyone already knows. I know you've been meeting her behind my back. I was the last to find out," Emily said, raising her voice and letting fake tears well up in her eyes. Matthew shook his head, stunned. Emily, this is crazy. Why are you saying this? Sophia is just our neighbor. I hardly talk to her. Lies, Emily shouted, banging on the table. All the neighbors told me. Do you think I'm dumb, that I wouldn't notice? He was speechless for a few seconds, trying to understand where this was coming from. Matthew knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the intensity of Emily's accusation made him insecure. He tried to argue, Emily, I don't know what you heard, but it's not true. I would never do this to you. But Emily didn't back down. She knew she needed to be firm. It's no use denying, Matthew. I've made my decision. I want a divorce. The words seemed to echo in the room, and Matthew looked at her as if he'd been punched. He got up from the sofa, trying to compose himself. Divorce? Because of something that didn't even happen? This doesn't make sense, Emily. We can talk, resolve this. You're being unfair. Unfair? Do you think it's easy for me? She retorted, her voice choked. I dedicated myself to this marriage, to you, to our life. And what do I get in return? Betrayal. Matthew tried to approach, but she recoiled, raising her hands as if his touch were unbearable. He finally realized he couldn't convince her. Emily's eyes were filled with a determination he didn't recognize. Fine, he said, defeated. If that's what you want, I'm leaving the house. But I won't sign anything until I talk to a lawyer. Emily nodded, hiding a satisfied smile. She knew he needed time to process, but she also knew that deep down, Matthew was a man of his word. He would end up signing the papers, especially because he would believe he was in moral debt. That same night, Matthew packed a suitcase with some clothes and left the house. He had no idea where to go, but the first person that came to mind was Sophia. She had always been friendly and seemed trustworthy. He knocked on her apartment door hesitantly, but upon seeing him, Sophia realized something was wrong. Matthew? What happened? She asked, making space for him to enter. I don't know where to start. Emily accused me of cheating. She said I was with you, and now she wants a divorce. Sophia widened her eyes, incredulous. What? This is absurd. Why would she do that? I don't know, he replied, sitting on the sofa with his head in his hands. But it seems like everyone believes it. The neighbors, even Emily. I don't understand. Sophia, despite being surprised, felt a pang of pity. She knew Matthew was an honest and hard-working man. She decided she couldn't leave him helpless. Stay here for now, until you get things sorted out. We're going to figure out what's going on. Matthew thanked her, not realizing that Sophia's generosity was putting both of them at the center of something much bigger. Meanwhile, Emily was at home, satisfied with how things were unfolding. With Matthew out of the way and the gossip serving as justification, she had the space to execute the next phase of her plan, cashing in the lottery prize without raising suspicions. Sitting at the kitchen table, with the winning ticket in her hands, Emily laughed to herself. One step at a time. Soon all of this will be over. The game was working exactly as she had planned. What Emily didn't imagine was that her actions were starting to generate suspicions that could turn the tables at any moment. Sophia watched Matthew closely. He seemed downcast, lost. Since Emily had kicked him out of the house, he spent most of his time in silence, staring out the window or tinkering with some mechanical part he brought in to distract his mind. Sophia couldn't believe he could be the man Emily had portrayed in her accusations. There was something strange about the whole story, something that didn't fit. The first thing that piqued Sophia's curiosity was how quickly Emily was handling the divorce. According to Matthew, she already had a lawyer and seemed determined to resolve everything as quickly as possible. It was as if there was an unusual haste, something Sophia knew wasn't typical of Emily, who had always been meticulous and controlling. Matthew, have you ever wondered why she's doing this so suddenly? Sophia asked one afternoon while they were having coffee. Matthew sighed, clutching the cup in his hands. I've tried to understand, but I don't know. Maybe she's tired of me, or maybe she really believes the gossip. It doesn't make sense, Sophia murmured, thoughtful. And this gossip? It started out of nowhere, as if someone had planted the idea. Matthew looked at her, surprised. Do you think Emily did this on purpose? I don't know, but something tells me there's more to this story than you imagine. In the following days, Sophia began to watch Emily more closely. She noticed the forced smiles, the quick conversations, and the furtive glances Emily cast whenever they crossed paths in the building. Sophia wasn't the type to easily believe in coincidences, and her intuition told her something bigger was happening. The opportunity to investigate arose one Monday afternoon, when Sophia overheard a conversation between Emily and Mrs. Elizabeth in the building's laundry room. Sophia had gone down to pick up her laundry when she heard Emily mention something about a lottery ticket. It was really luck, you know, Emily said, with a smile that seemed more triumphant than casual. I only bought it because I thought it would be fun to try. Sophia froze. The mention of a lottery ticket reminded her of something Matthew had mentioned once, that Emily loved playing the lottery, but used his money to buy the tickets. It was just a curiosity at the time, but now it seemed to be an important piece of the puzzle. Determined to find out more, Sophia started looking for clues. During a walk with Matthew around the neighborhood, she cautiously brought up the subject. Matthew, do you remember if Emily bought any lottery tickets recently? He thought for a moment, frowning. I think so. Last week she said she used the change from one of my purchases for that. Why? Just curious, Sophia replied, trying not to appear alarmed, but inside the pieces were starting to fit. Sophia decided to take a bolder step. She waited until Emily left the house for work and, pretending to be looking for something to return, knocked on Mrs. Elizabeth's door. Mrs. Elizabeth, Emily mentioned something about a lottery ticket these days. Do you know more about it? She asked, adopting a casual tone. Mrs. Elizabeth, always eager to share information, told how Emily had mentioned buying the ticket and how she seemed to be in a good mood lately despite the divorce. She didn't say much, but you know how it is. It looks like she's hiding something. I bet it's about money. Sophia thanked her and left with the confirmation she needed. Now, everything made sense. Emily was trying to get rid of Matthew without splitting the fortune. The haste in the divorce, the gossip, the manipulation, everything pointed to a single goal. Doubt turned into certainty when Sophia decided to discreetly access Emily's social media. In an old post, Emily had commented about incredible changes coming soon, with money and travel emojis. Although subtle, it was enough for Sophia to know she was on the right track. One night, while Matthew was sleeping on the sofa, Sophia sat at her dining table with her heart racing. She knew she needed to tell him the truth, but she also knew she would need evidence. Still, the revelation was inevitable. Matthew, I think I know what's happening, she said the next morning when he woke up. Emily won the lottery. I'm almost sure. Matthew furrowed his brow. What? What do you mean? Sophia explained everything she had discovered from the conversation with Mrs. Elizabeth to the online investigation. Matthew listened in silence, his eyes reflecting a mix of shock and anger. If that's true, he began, but his voice faltered. Then she planned all this just to keep the money? Sophia nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know it's a lot to process, but we need to act before she executes the plan. Matthew took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the situation. He didn't know what Emily would do next, but he was sure of one thing. Now he was ready to play the same game. Sophia knew that time was against her. Each passing day was an opportunity for Emily to execute her plan and cash in the lottery prize. Nights became sleepless for Sophia, who spent hours trying to imagine where Emily could hide something so valuable. And it was during one of those late nights that she decided to act. The next morning, Sophia patiently waited for Emily to leave for work. She knew she would have only a few hours, but it was enough. She informed Matthew of her intention and asked him to stay away for the time being. "I'm going there," she said, with a firmness in her voice that Matthew had never seen before. "If she really hid the ticket at home, I'll find it." Matthew hesitated. He didn't like the idea of Sophia taking risks, but he knew there was no other way. "Be careful, Sophia, and let me know as soon as you find something." Emily had a pattern. She always left for work at 6 in the morning and only returned at night. Sophia waited until she was sure the apartment was empty. She decided to enter through the balcony using a board to walk to Emily's apartment balcony with an improvised hook to open the kitchen window. She managed to get in, something she had learned years earlier in an emergency. Her heart was pounding, but her determination was stronger. Inside the apartment, everything seemed in order. Emily's simple decor didn't provide many clues, but Sophia knew the ticket wouldn't be in an obvious place. She started in the living room, opening drawers and carefully examining any object that might hide something small. Nothing. It was when she reached Emily's bedroom that something caught her attention. On top of the wardrobe, there was an old, dusty cookie tin. Sophia climbed onto a chair and, with trembling hands, pulled out the tin. Upon opening it, she found what seemed to be a pile of unimportant papers, but hidden among them was the winning ticket. Sophia could hardly believe it. There it was, the object of the entire plot, seemingly forgotten in an ordinary tin. For a moment she was paralyzed, contemplating the irony of the situation. "Got you, you rascal," she murmured, carefully placing the ticket in her purse. Before leaving, Sophia checked to ensure everything was as she had found it. She couldn't leave any traces. The goal was to take the ticket without Emily noticing anything. Back at her apartment, Sophia handed the ticket to Matthew. He remained silent for long minutes, just staring at the piece of paper that now seemed to weigh a ton. The realization finally hit him. Emily had betrayed his trust so coldly and calculatively that he could hardly process it. "She used my money to buy this," he said, his voice low and filled with hurt. "And then she set everything up to throw me out." Sophia nodded, but her look wasn't one of compassion. It was one of determination. "Matthew, she wanted to deceive you, but now you're the one in control. What are you going to do?" He took a deep breath, clutching the ticket tightly. "I'm going to give her what she deserves." In the following days, Matthew acted as if nothing had changed. He signed the divorce papers with a serene expression, even friendly, which made Emily suspicious. She expected resistance, accusations, maybe even a confrontation, but Matthew seemed indifferent. "Is that it then?" she asked when she saw him sign the last document. "That's it. I hope you're happy, Emily." She smiled, but there was something unsettling about his calmness. However, her anxiety for the future prevented her from thinking too much about it. Everything was finally falling into place. The divorce was just days away from being finalized, and she felt closer to the prize than ever. While Emily planned her new life, Matthew and Sophia prepared to turn the tables. He knew that Emily was on the verge of experiencing the same feeling of betrayal she had inflicted on him, but this time in public. And Matthew, for the first time, awaited the moment with a smile on his face. The morning was sunny, with the blue sky illuminating the main hall of a local community center. There, a grand ceremony was being prepared for the public announcement of the winner of the $1 million lottery prize. Journalists, armed with cameras and microphones, were adjusting their equipment, while a huge symbolic check displaying the prize amount was showcased on the stage. Matthew was backstage, wearing the best shirt he had, a gift from Sophia. Despite his nervousness, there was something that kept him calm, the certainty that he was about to give Emily a bitter taste of her own weapon. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sophia asked, adjusting the last details of his suit. "I am. She needs to learn that you don't mess with people this way," Matthew replied, taking a deep breath. "And besides, the ticket is mine by right." Sophia smiled, squeezing his shoulder in an encouraging gesture. Together they went up to the stage for the big moment. Emily, on the other side of the city, was at home. She was anxious but confident. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. With the divorce nearly finalized, she would soon be free to claim the lottery prize. She decided to turn on the television while having her coffee, just to pass the time. It was then that she saw the live broadcast of the ceremony. The camera was capturing Matthew going up to the stage, holding an envelope that she knew well. Emily froze. The cup in her hand fell, spilling coffee over the table. "What is he doing there?" she shouted, desperate. The event's host announced enthusiastically, "And here is the winner of the $1 million lottery prize, Matthew Green." The audience applauded as Matthew opened the envelope and presented the winning ticket. He maintained a calm posture, but the glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. Emily, completely out of herself, grabbed the keys and ran out of the house. A few minutes later, Emily arrived at the ceremony venue. She rushed into the hall, pushing past journalists and curious onlookers crowding at the entrance. Upon seeing Matthew on the stage holding the gigantic check, she began to scream. "He can't keep this prize! This money is mine!" she yelled, attracting everyone's attention. The entire hall fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Matthew calmly descended the steps of the stage, holding the microphone. "Emily," he said with a firm and controlled voice, "do you really want to do this here, in front of everyone?" She ignored the warning. "This ticket is mine. It belongs to me. You stole from me," she continued, pointing at him angrily. "I demand you give it back." Matthew exchanged a brief look with Sophia, who was beside the stage. She nodded, signaling that it was time to expose the truth. "All right," he said, turning to the crowd. "Let's clarify things. This ticket, which just made me a millionaire, was bought with my money." The crowd murmured, confused, as Matthew continued, "Emily took the change from one of my purchases to buy this ticket. She knew I trusted her, and when she found out she had won, she decided to plan a divorce so as not to split the prize with me. She spread rumors that I was cheating on her and tried to kick me out of the house." Emily was left speechless. Her face was red, and she shook her head in denial. "That's not true. He's lying," she shouted, but her voice seemed fragile amidst the audience's outrage. Sophia then went up to the stage with an envelope in her hands. "Here are the receipts of the purchases made by Matthew," she said, addressing the audience and showing the documents. "This money was used to buy the ticket. There's no doubt that it belongs to him." The journalists began firing questions, the cameras focusing on Emily's distressed face. The audience, which was initially confused, was now clearly against her. Cheers began to echo throughout the hall. "Fraudster!" someone shouted. "What a shame!" another voice said. Emily tried to justify her actions, but her arguments were drowned out by the boos and laughter. Desperate, she ran out of the hall, leaving behind public humiliation. Back on the stage, Matthew held the microphone again. "I didn't want things to come to this point, but sometimes the truth needs to come to light." The audience applauded as he received the check symbolizing his victory. Sophia was by his side, smiling discreetly. Both knew that the battle was won, and now the path was clear for a new beginning. Emily spent her days locked up in the house that Matthew had left her, which should have been an act of generosity but sounded like an insult to her. Loneliness was her only companion, while the gossip and contemptuous looks in the building only fueled her anger. She was no longer the woman who planned her rise with intelligence. Now she was someone consumed by resentment. The world seemed to laugh at her. Matthew, the man she believed to be weak and naive, had turned things around. Now he lived a new life, full of possibilities, while she, who had orchestrated everything, was trapped in ruin. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at her. It was during a silent night that Emily had her epiphany. Sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by empty bottles and memories of her failed plans, she finally formulated the idea that seemed inevitable. If Matthew disappeared, everything he had could be hers. She just needed to create an opportunity to reverse the humiliation. The plan began to take shape in the following days. Emily got up early with a purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She discreetly researched online, looking for methods for the perfect accident. She found her answer in a discreet poison, easily accessible and difficult to detect in small quantities. She carefully purchased the necessary items, splitting her purchases in different places to avoid suspicion. Each step was planned with the precision she had used in her first plot against Matthew, but this time the motivation was even darker. Emily knew she would need to create a convincing scenario to lure Matthew. She opted for something symbolic, a special dinner, an attempt at reconciliation. He would believe she was trying to make peace, and his kind nature would prevent him from refusing. On the day of the dinner, Emily transformed the house into a celebration-worthy setting. The table was covered with an elegant tablecloth she had kept for years for special occasions. Candles were carefully arranged, and the aroma of a sophisticated meal filled the air. Everything seemed perfect. The most important detail, however, was the wine. She had bought an expensive bottle, something she knew would impress Matthew. One of the glasses, carefully marked, contained the poison she had planned to use. Emily mentally reviewed the plan several times as she prepared the dishes, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge and victory. When Matthew arrived, he looked confused, but accepted the invitation with the same kindness he had always shown. "I didn't expect this, Emily." "What's going on?" he asked, looking around the decorated room. Emily smiled, adjusting the napkin on the table. "I just wanted to end everything peacefully. I think I owe you that at least." Matthew hesitated, but eventually sat down at the table. He wasn't the type of person to reject a gesture of goodwill, even if something seemed off. As dinner progressed, Emily kept the conversation light, alternating between memories of the past and comments about how they both needed to move forward. Matthew seemed relaxed, but still cautious. He didn't realize that the woman in front of him was about to do something unthinkable. Emily, for her part, tried to disguise the tension. Every second brought her closer to the moment she had been waiting for. The wine was ready, the glasses were served, and all she needed was for Matthew to make the toast. But at that moment, as she watched the man with whom she had shared years of her life, Emily felt a pang of doubt. It wasn't remorse, it was just the recognition that she was crossing an irreversible line. Even so, her desire for revenge outweighed any hesitation. The dinner was about to reach its climax, but the poison still awaited in the glass, marking the definitive breaking point. The table was set, and destiny awaited the decisive moment. The dinner was at the peak of its silent tension. The candles were slowly melting, creating flickering shadows on the walls, while Emily, radiating confidence, raised her glass of wine. The plan seemed foolproof. Matthew, with his gentle and unsuspecting nature, didn't suspect anything. He had accepted the invitation to dinner with gratitude, thinking it was perhaps a sincere attempt to end things peacefully. Emily, however, was completely engrossed in the theater she had created. She laughed easily during conversations, toasted to second chances, and encouraged Matthew to relax. In her mind, she had already visualized the moment he would start to feel the effects of the poison, allowing her to take control of the fortune that, in her view, had always been rightfully hers. But haste and overconfidence come at a price. Throughout the dinner, the wine glass Emily had marked with poison was inadvertently swapped. In a careless gesture while serving the dishes, she lost control of the positioning of the glasses. Unaware of the mistake, Emily raised the wrong glass and toasted, bringing the wine to her lips. The metallic taste was the first thing that caught her attention. Emily furrowed her brow, but thought it was just a note of the drink she didn't know well. She continued drinking, trying to maintain her composure, but soon felt a strange heat rising through her body. Her vision began to blur, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Matthew noticed the discomfort. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked, leaning forward. She tried to respond, but the words came out garbled. In seconds, Emily fell off the chair, knocking the plate to the ground. Matthew, alarmed, rushed to help her. "Emily, what did you do?" he shouted, as she desperately tried to say something, her eyes full of panic. At the hospital, Emily was stabilized thanks to Matthew's quickness in calling an ambulance, but the story that followed was darker than anyone could have imagined. While the doctors treated Emily, a toxicology test revealed the presence of poison in her system. The police were called, and Matthew was interrogated about the incident. He, without hesitation, told everything he knew, including his suspicions about Emily's strange behavior and the context of the dinner. This led the investigators to search her house, where they found irrefutable evidence, online research about poison, recent purchases, and even a draft of the plan written in a notebook. When Emily woke up, she was met by 2 police officers at her bedside. With no way out, she confessed, I wanted what was rightfully mine. He stole everything from me," she shouted, but her voice no longer carried the same conviction. It was the outburst of someone who knew she had lost. Emily was arrested for attempted murder. In the following months, Matthew tried to rebuild his life. Despite everything, he did not harbor hatred for Emily, only a deep sadness for the path she had chosen. He sold the house he had left her and used the money to invest in a better future. Sophia, who stood by him throughout the ordeal, became an essential part of his new life. With Matthew's financial support, she began studying law, an old dream she had postponed due to lack of resources. For Matthew, helping her was more than an act of generosity. It was a way to give meaning to everything that had happened. One afternoon, while walking together in a park, Matthew looked at Sophia and said, "I never imagined things would end up like this. I tried to be fair with Emily, but greed, it destroys everything." Sophia, holding his hand, replied with a smile, "The important thing is that you did what was right, and now we can move forward." Over time, the bond between them grew. Matthew found in Sophia not just a friend, but someone with whom he could share his dreams and hopes. The partnership that began as mutual support transformed into something deeper. In the end, Matthew reflected that the fortune that once seemed like a curse was now a symbol of redemption. He had faced betrayals and losses, but emerged stronger and with a renewed purpose. As he and Sophia walked hand in hand, the future finally seemed bright, full of possibilities and hope. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.